Thank you. And for the homepage of my workplace, the Institute of History.
Yeah.
So
As a proof that
not just a proof, just a piece of information. It's a news. As a document, yeah.
Nice souvenir.
One picture is enough.
Carly, do we have the PowerPoint set up?
Yeah, I'll come in and start that when you're ready.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and get started then? Welcome everyone. My name is Christopher Caes. I'm one of the co-directors of the East Central European Center here in the Harriman Institute at Columbia University. My other co-director, Alexander Boszkiewicz, the lecturer in BCS, is away today. I'm also the lecturer in Polish here. And we want to welcome you to another event in what is an exciting and event-filled season this spring at the East Central European Center. Today, we are very pleased to welcome one of the premier researchers of the Holocaust in Hungary, Tamás Stark. Tamás is a senior research fellow at the Institute of History Research Center for the Humanities at the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. He's also been a research fellow at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And he is the author of Hungarian Jews during the Holocaust and after the Second World War, 1939 to 1949, a statistical review, published, I believe, by our own Columbia University Press, if I'm not mistaken.
Distributed by the Columbia University
Distributed
Press.
by the Columbia University
Yes,
Press. So
yes.
we're pleased to welcome, in a sense, one of our own here as well. Tamás is also the author of multiple other studies in Hungarian, the titles of which I'm going to not mangle since I don't know Hungarian, but I'm sure that we will hear a lot about his most recent book project, focusing on the first deportation of the Hungarian Jews in 1941, in the early period of the Holocaust. So let's welcome Tamás here today to us. We will hear from Tamás for about a half an hour or 40 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time for questions from our live audience as well as our online audience who can submit questions during the Q&A through the Q&A function on the Zoom interface. Okay, we're just waiting for the PowerPoint to start up there, and we will then take it away. Okay.
Okay.
Please go ahead, Tamás. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the introduction. So at the beginning of my talk, I would like to summarize what happened. It's in summer 1941. In July 1941, about 20,000 Hungarian Jews, so-called alien Jews, were deported to the former Soviet territories, which was under Hungarian occupation. In mid-August, the government halted deportation, but it did not allow the deported people to return to Hungarian territories. Most of them became the victims of the massacre committed by German police battalion in Kamenetsk-Podolsk in late August 1941. It is a less known chapter of the history of the Holocaust. Nevertheless, this is the only chapter on which there is a kind of a debate or a disagreement in Hungary. A well-known Hungarian military historian just a couple of years ago declared that the deportation was not more than a police action against non-Hungarian citizens. He also declared, and it is also a widespread opinion, that only those Jews were deported who were not Hungarian citizens. It is also said that Hungarian authorities, policemen and members of the Hungarian gendarmerie treated correctly in a fair way to these so-called alien Jews. Another widespread opinion is that when news reached the Hungarian government about the tragic fate of Jews in Galicia, the Hungarian Minister of Interior immediately stopped the deportation. Therefore, the Hungarian government did its best to save the life of Jews. Holocaust scholars refused these opinions, refused these falsifications, underlying that the intention of the Hungarian government was to expel as many Jews, as many unwanted Jews as possible. The main reason why the government suspended the deportation was not the tragic fate of the Jews, but the pressure of the German High Command, which did not want more Jews in the occupied territories. In general, I agree with these arguments. I agree with the arguments of the Holocaust scholars. I think, however, that we need to put the history of the first deportation into a much larger context. My theory is that if we like to understand what really happened and why in the summer of 1941, we need to go back to the years of the First World War, or we need to go back to the early First World War period. The focus of my talk is the long road which led to the direction, which led to the deportation of so-called alien Jews, which was implemented in 1941. The wave of violent anti-Semitism swept through East Central Europe after the Great War. In the early 20s, Hungarian, Polish, and Romanian political elites in power were in common in seeing the so-called Jewish question as one of the most actual, as one of the greatest problems of the nation. The propagated so-called solution to the problem was everywhere the same: cutting the supposed influence of Jews in the field of economy and culture, and cutting and reduce the number of Jews by expelling the so-called alien Jews. Hungary, and to a certain extent Romania, are in the focus of my talk. Romanian scene is important not only because the Romanian policy toward the Jews was quite similar to the Hungarian policy, but because the Romanian regulations about citizenship seriously influenced the fate of Transylvanian Jews after 1940, when the northern part of Transylvania was reattached to Hungary. Who were the alien Jews? Who were the alien Jews in Hungary? The official term was aliens who belonged to the Jewish race. So that was the official term for the alien Jews. The aliens were those Jews who came from Galicia, fleeing from advancing Russian army in 1914 and in the first phase of the First World War. Most of these refugees left Hungary and they tried to settle in Vienna or in other parts of Austria. Actually, they were Austrian citizens since they came Galicia. However, a couple of thousand Jews or Jewish refugees remained in Hungary. They were well received in the first years of the war. However, this attitude dramatically changed later. In public discourse, they were charged with profiting from food shortages and from inflation. In the last war year, they became public enemies who were taken responsible for all major problems of the country. Journalists, public speakers, members of the parliament began to speak about the invasion of Galicians, and they were also often called as country conquerors. The anti-refugee, the anti-Galician campaign, which was a product of frustration, collapse, and despair because of the defeat in the First World War, paved the way for the anti-Semitism of the Horthy regime. Horthy regime, Hungary during the interwar period and also during the Second World War was led by Nicholas Horthy, Miklós Horthy, who was the regent of the Hungary. This is why we call this period after him Horthy regime, the period of Horthy regime. That kind of anti-Semitism which was formulated during the First World War, defined the nature of the anti-Semitism of the Horthy regime. And I would like to present some cartoons which were made, or which were published during the First World War. And if you see the first cartoon, you can see that Hungarian soldiers are crossing the Carpathian Mountains to fight against the Russian soldiers. And on the other side, at the left-hand side of the pictures, you can see Jewish refugees who came from Galicia. And the text is under the cartoon is that we can cope, or we can stop the Russian invasion, but we cannot cope the invasion of Galician Jews. And let's see another cartoon. Yes, this is another cartoon, a cartoon about Jewish refugees when they came to Hungary, and they were very poor, but at the end of the war, they became rich because they profited the inflation and they profited the food shortages, and now they will be expelled from Hungarian territory, or they're supposed to be expelled from Hungarian territory. And this is another cartoon that the Hungarian gendarmerie tried to get rid of a Jewish refugee from Galicia who became rich, as you can see, the cartoon. In 1919 and later, the term alien of Jewish race included not only those who came to Hungary from Galicia during the Great War, but those too who came to Hungary before the war, or whose ancestors came to Hungary from Galicia in the 19th century. This point of view was backed by the theory of Jewish invasion from Galicia in the 19th century. The invasion of Galician Jews was a widely accepted theory in the interwar years in Hungary. According to this myth, masses of emigrants who came to Hungary mainly illegally from Galicia or from Russia did not want to assimilate to the Hungarians. They preserved their typical Eastern character. They were and they remained aliens who did not identify themselves with the national aims of the Hungarian nation. They were also charged with blocking the process of assimilation of those Jews who had settled in Hungary well before their arrival. In general, Galician Jews were made responsible for all problems, for all faults of capitalism, and also for the defeat in the First World War, and also for the first communist dictatorship in 1919. I have to underline that this theory of invasion from Galicia, it's a myth. But in the interwar period, the term Galician Jews was extended to all Jews who were considered undesirable, who were considered unwanted by the regime, by the Horthy regime. The Hungarian political elite vehemently demanded the expulsion of the Galician Jews since the late 1919, as you see the cartoon. I would like to give some examples to present the atmosphere of Hungary in the early 20s, because this is without this, I think that we cannot understand what happened in 1941. The largest Hungarian post-war civil organization, the Association of Awakening Hungarians, demanded the relocation, the resettlement, the whole Jewish community, or at least the Galician Jews. We are speaking on the early 20s. In January 1920, the Minister of Interior Affairs, István Friedrich, who used to be the Prime Minister of Hungary in the fall of 1990, said in the House of Representatives that the main task of the newly elected representatives would be to rid the country of the Jews of Galician origin, because they had no place in a Christian country, in a Christian Hungary. In September 1920, in the House of the Representatives, a Roman Catholic bishop, Ottokar Prohászka, who was the spiritual leader and one of the founders of the Horthy regime, demanded that Galician Jews should be sent to the Jewish national home to Palestine. In 5th of September 1920, at the Council of Ministers, Gyula Ferdinandi, who was the Minister of Interior at that time, said the following: It would be the interest of the country to expel all Jews who had no Hungarian citizenship. Although the members, quotation ends, although the members of the government supported this plan, no decision was made at that time about the expel of foreign Jews. The reason of abandoning of this plan was that the Hungarian government was afraid of the protest of Great Britain and Italy, because they thought that Jews had enormous influence in these countries. Romanian political elite also made distinction between alien Jews and Romanian Jews. Jews who lived in the new territories of Romania, Bessarabia, Bukovina, and Transylvania belonged to that alien group. And this group also included those Jews who moved to Romania during the First World War. Romanian political elite distinguished this group of alien Jews from those Jews who lived in the territory of the Old Kingdom. The most famous Romanian poet and writer, Octavian Goga, who was also a politician and who was Minister of State in 1920, advocated for the removal of all Jews in the new territories who could not prove their Romanian citizenship. The same year, the Romanian government passed a decree about the removal of those Jews who infiltrated to Romanian territory during the First World War and who were not Romanian citizens. The problem was, however, that the conditions of citizenship were not clearly specified. The Romanian policy toward the alien Jews and toward the refugees is quite similar, or was quite similar, to the policy of the Hungarian regime towards the Galician Jews. The campaign against the alien Jews made the Jews to realize the importance of getting documents on their citizenship. Now we arrived at the problem of the citizenship, which was a main problem not only in Hungary, but in whole Europe, in Romania and in Poland in particular. In the 19th century, nobody had official documents which proved that the owner of the paper had Hungarian citizenship or Austrian citizenship. In everyday life, authorities did not ask papers on citizenship. A birth certificate was enough to get passport or to settle somewhere. When during the First World War, young males were drafted to the army, nobody asked documents on the citizenship. But in the 20s and later, the proof of citizenship became important for Jews. The proof was a certificate of citizenship issued the Ministry of Interior. This paper meant security for the Jews. But the Ministry of Interior, especially in the late 30s, made extremely difficult for Jews to get this certificate. According to the Hungarian citizenship law, issued in 1879, and it was still effective in the 20s and the 30s, those persons were alleged for Hungarian citizenship whose parents were Hungarian citizens. In other words, the place of birth did not matter at all. A Jew was eligible for Hungarian citizenship only if he could prove that even his grandparents lived in Hungarian territory constantly. it was a great challenge to collect the necessary documents, especially for those Orthodox Jews who live along the eastern borders of Hungary. These rules, these regulations were introduced in order to filter out those Jews whose ancestors had come from Galicia or from elsewhere, as they could not prove that their grandparents had lived in Hungary. Jews, especially unwanted Galician Jews, were at the mercy of the authorities when formally acquiring citizenship. So it is not an exaggeration to say that the citizenship department of the at the Ministry of Interior could easily create foreign Jews, could easily create stateless Jews, Jews who were not, who had no opportunity, who cannot prove that they were Hungarian citizens. The situation was about the same in Romania. In the peace talks in Paris after the First World War, under the pressure of the Entente powers, Romania signed a minority protection pact. It included that Romania automatically recognized as Romanian citizens those persons who stayed in the territory of Transylvania and Bukovina at the time when this pact became effective. But the pact did not bring solution to the problem of citizenship of the Jews who lived in these new territories Romania gained after the First World War. The Romanian citizenship law, which was released in 1924, overruled the Minority Protection Pact. The citizenship law declared that those persons who live in the territory of Transylvania and Bukovina were eligible for citizenship only if they possessed a so-called municipal residence. But it was very difficult for Jews to get this municipal residence. Consequently, tens of thousands of Jews remained stateless in Romanian territory. I mentioned that in Hungary, Jews were at the mercy of the authorities when formally acquiring citizenship. The same was the case in Romania. The situation deteriorated even further when the government of Alexandru Cuza and Octavian Goga ordered a revision of citizenship in January 1938. As a result, some 60,000 more Jews became stateless in the territory of Transylvania. Why is it important? It is important because when the northern part of Transylvania returned to Hungary due to the Second Vienna Accord, Hungary automatically recognized as Hungarian citizens those persons who had Romanian citizenship. But the stateless Jews remained stateless, and many of them became the victims of the deportation of the foreign Jews in 1941. So you understand that they had no Romanian citizenship because of the Romanian citizenship law, and they remained stateless. They did not get Hungarian citizenship since they were not Romanian citizens. After the Great War, victorious powers, Entente powers, rebuilt Central and Eastern Europe in the continent in the name of democracy and self-determination. So as a consequence, in the 20s, anti-Semitic policies were not tolerated. Consequently, it was not possible to introduce anti-Jewish laws and to expel unwanted citizens. So I spoke about the demand for the solution of the Jewish question in Hungary and in Romania. But in the 20s and even in the early 30s, it was not possible to implement expulsion of so-called foreign citizens. But the situation changed dramatically with the rise of Nazi Germany, when East Central Europe gradually became the part of German sphere of influence. In the late 30s, time came to implement the anti-Jewish programs in East Central Europe. In both countries, I mean Hungary and Romania, anti-Jewish legislation were introduced. With the invasion against the Soviet Union, the time came to implement the expulsion of the unwanted Jews too. Hungary entered the war at the side of Germany. Within the weeks, Hungarian army occupied the eastern part of Galicia, and military administration was introduced temporarily. Excuse me. I would like to show you a map. So Hungary introduced, the Hungarian army introduced, introduced the eastern part of Galicia, that part of Galicia, I mean occupied the eastern part of Galicia, and Romania also entered the war with a significant military force, and the Romanian army quickly reoccupied northern part of Bukovina and Bessarabia territories, which became part of Romania after the First World War. However, these territories were occupied by the Soviet Union in 1940. So this territory, Bukovina and Bessarabia, was reoccupied by Romanian army, and the Romanian army went on, and they also occupied the territory which located between the river Dniester and the river Bug, and this territory was called Transnistria. So with the occupation of Soviet territories, there was already room for the expulsion of unwanted Jews. Both Romanian and Hungarian governments looked upon the occupied territories, or the temporarily occupied territories, as a dumping ground for the undesirable groups, for the unwanted Jews and also for the unwanted Romas. There is a debate among Hungarian historians on who initiated the deportation of foreign Jews. István Kozma, the governor of Kárpát-Ruthénia, was one of the architects of the deportation. The Hungarian general staff also played a decisive role in the decision-making process leading up to the deportations. I think, however, that it is not an important question who initiated the deportation, since the expulsion of unwanted Jews was always a main aim of the political elite of the Horthy regime. It was almost obvious that opportunity arose, the foreign Jews would be deported. Formally, the National Alien Control Office ordered the deportation of foreign Jews on 12th of July 1941. The Hungarian government did not consult with the German leadership on the subject of deportation. Although the territory designated for the deportation was under the Hungarian army's occupation at that time, it was obvious that the area would soon be assigned under the German administration, and that the new occupants, the Germans, would not tolerate any Aryan Jews in their own territory. However, the deportation of the unwanted Galician Jews had become such a central and long-time objective of the Hungarian leadership and the Hungarian political elite that it launched the deportation even at the risk of going against the German will. I mentioned that the key element of the Hungarian anti-Semitism was the invasion of Galicians in the 19th century. This is one of the strongest anti-Semitic myths in Hungary. The deportation in 1941 was looked upon as a revenge for this invasion, for the invasion of Galicians. This deportation was looked upon as a so-called as a counter-invasion. The deportation was called repatriation, the repatriation of Galician Jews to their homeland, to the homeland of their ancestors, to Galicia. And here I would like to show you another cartoon which was published in July 1941, and it is not easy to translate the text of the cartoon, but I try to translate. I think the message of the cartoon is that we need to make a state Jews-less, and we need to create Jews stateless. Am I right? Is it a good translation? So this is the message of this anti-Semitic cartoon, but it also expresses the atmosphere in Hungary during the summer of 1941. The deportation mostly took place in Budapest and in the northeastern part and the eastern parts of Hungary. In these regions, there were hardly any major settlements from which no alien Jews were rounded up and transported to Galicia. The Jews who were rounded up were transported to Körösmező, a village close to the former Hungarian-Soviet border. Jews were usually transported in military lorries from Körösmező beyond to river Dniester to prevent the Jews from returning to Hungary. When the lorries crossed the river Dniester, the deported Jews were ordered to get off the lorries, and they were often warned that they wouldn't be allowed to return to Hungarian territory. It was a perpetual wandering that awaited the Hungarian Jews in Galicia and also at the eastern bank of the Dniester River. The local inhabitants were hostile towards the newcomers. It often happened that the abandoned Jews were rounded up by Ukrainian armed groups, and they were made to march the Jews in convoys from village to village. The greater part of the deported Jews temporarily settled in Kamenetsk-Podolsk, a city which is located between Galicia and Bukovina. And you can see I'm speaking on this village, which is very close to the Romanian border. The Romanian authorities did much the same to the unwanted Jews as Hungarians. Since mid-July, tens of thousands of Jews were rounded up in Bukovina, in this region, in Bukovina and Bessarabia, and the Jews then were forced, or they were pushed across the Dniester River to the direction of Kamenetsk-Podolsk and to the direction of Volhynia. As I mentioned, neither Hungarian nor Romanian governments consulted German leadership on the deportation of Jews. Consequently, the Germans protested against the resettlements of foreign Jews to their territory. German military authorities argued that the presence of foreign Jews was creating tension among local population and further worsened the food supply, and the Jews were also seen as a security risk at the background of the German army. Under the German pressure, the Romanian government stopped deportation on 9th of August 1941. The Hungarian Minister of Interior, Ferenc Keresztes Fischer, also ordered the suspension of the deportation the same day. Although the intention of the Nazi leaders to exterminate the Jews was clear, the extermination in the summer of 1941 was not a centrally directed. The extermination was not centrally directed and did not follow a coherent plan. In the summer of 1941, the killing process escalated rapidly. This was reflected not only in the increasing number of victims, but also in the growing number of women and children among them. The fate of Hungarian deported Jews in Kamenetsk-Podolsk was decided at a meeting held at the German army headquarters in Vinica in 25th of August. At this meeting, senior military officials, decided to introduce civil administration in the occupied Ukrainian territories from 1st of September. At the meeting, SS General Friedrich Jekan promised to liquidate the local and Hungarian and Romanian Jews in the region of Kamenetsk-Podolsk by 1st of September. And between 27th and between 29th of August, series of massacres were carried out at Kamenetsk-Podolsk. SS General Jekan reported later that altogether 23,000 Jews had been murdered. Of these 23,000, the Hungarian victims numbered between 14 and 16,000. Deported Hungarian Jews abandoned somewhere in Galicia or in the region beyond the Dniester River, tried to return to Hungary, although they were not allowed to return. They were not allowed to return, but they tried to return. After the massacre in Kamenetsk-Podolsk, returning to Hungary meant life. How did Hungarian authorities react to the return attempts of the deported Jews? The reaction was the closure of the border. Returning Jews were detained at the border, and many were shot. Those who managed to enter Hungary were interned. So the Hungarian government, conclusion, Hungarian government did not deport foreign Jews to Galicia to destroy them or to be destroyed. But the government was responsible for the fate of the Jews because it closed the borders to them and not letting them back when it was known that the deported Jews would sooner or later be slaughtered. So, and that's exactly what happened. In the fall of 1941, the majority of Hungarian Jews who had found temporary shelter in various towns in Galicia fell victims of the first phase of the German final solution, which Father Patrick Desbois called the Holocaust by bullets. The history of the deported Jews is only an episode in the history of the Holocaust. And we rightly associate the Holocaust with the Nazi Germany. It is important, however, to point that the plans for the relocation, the plans for the expulsion of unwanted Jews were made in other countries, actually in Hungary and also in Romania, long before the Nazis took power in Germany. And these plans were implemented with the support of the political elites before the German final solution program was launched. So that was my conclusion, and thank you very much for your attention. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Tamás. And for those of you who are online watching in the webinar, please feel free to enter any questions you might have in the Q&A tab. If I could just make one comment here while we're waiting for some questions to be launched, and as you folks are perhaps thinking of some questions, I'm really struck by the centrality of the state as a form in this story. You mentioned in your conclusion that the intent of the Hungarian elites was not to destroy the Jews physically, but to destroy their statehood or their stateless, their state, I guess their rights to state protection. So in a sense, as you said, the creation of a new category of people that is in some way outside the strictures of these new, polities that appeared after World War I. So it seems like there's a sort of an intermediate phase that precedes physical destruction, and that is this destruction of state identity for a population there. Very, very struck by that as a significant detail without, in other words, not proceeding straight towards murder and genocide, but first creating a population that could then be expelled and subject to whatever chance occurrences like the Ukrainian roundups or the slaughters in Kamenetsk-Podolsk in August of 1941.
The Jews were subjects of anti-Jewish legislation, but speaking on the deportation, those Jews were deported, however, that the process was stopped. But those Jews were deported who were considered as foreign, as foreigners. So that's a complex situation because after the First World War, so the attitude toward the Jews was that the Jews do not really belong to the Hungarian nation. And that policy was just the opposite, which used to be the policy of the Hungarian political elite before the First World War, when the Jews were received in Hungarian territory and they were considered as Hungarian nationals. So they were well received. They were considered Hungarian nationals. That situation dramatically changed after the First World War, since the whole Jewish community was considered as a non-Hungarian group, even though they were registered as Hungarians during the censuses, but they were considered somehow non-Hungarians. However, this Jewish group was not considered as a homogeneous one, because the Hungarian political elite made a distinction between the so-called good Jews and the bad Jews. And who were the bad Jews? The bad Jews were those who were so-called Galicians, the Galicians who came from Galicia or whose ancestors came from Galicia. And it is very interesting that, for example, the communists who created this first Hungarian communist dictatorship in 1990, they were always called, even by Nicholas Horthy and the Hungarian political elite, the Galician Jews. That it was the product of the Galician Jews. It was the revenge of the Galician Jews. And nobody investigated whether Béla Kun and the other communist leaders really came from Galicia or their ancestors came to Galicia. That was not a question. They were labeled as Galicians, and that's all. And so this regulation or this manipulation with the citizenship law made it possible for the government to select, legally, to select these so-called unwanted and desirable Jews. So that was the legal procedure to filter them out.
Let's open it up to questions. Would any of you folks like to ask a question?
I'll start then.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for this very informative and very interesting presentation. However hard it was to hear what was going on in Hungary at those times. And I also have to emphasize that I'm not a historian. And from my point of view, it was very interesting to hear what was going on in 1941. I think we know a lot less about that period of time in terms of deportation and the situation of the Jews than, for example, the one that took place in 1944. We know quite a lot about that because we learn about that in school. But the one that happened in 1941, and I believe before and afterwards as well, is just something that strikes me as new information. And you mentioned quite interesting terms in relation to how Jews were labeled at the time: public enemies, country conquerors. And you also pointed out that these kind of labels were promoted by politicians and public speakers and journalists as well. I'm just wondering what the general public felt about the Jews at that time. And I think we also have to differentiate between the situation in Budapest and the situation in the countryside. Because and your slides, your cartoons were all about Budapest as well. And for me, it's very interesting because my grandparents tell me a lot about those times, especially the pre-war situation, and of course the one in the aftermath of the war as well. And I come from a Christian family. But my great grandfather was a Protestant minister, and he set up a Protestant church in one of the towns in the countryside, and his bestest friend was the local Jewish rabbi. And what they say, what my grandfather and grandmother say, is that the general sentiment about Judaism was not negative in the countryside at all. They lived side by side, they lived together as well. I probably shouldn't use this term side by side, because they were really forming a community. It did not matter to them who was Jewish and who was Christian. The Jews went to the synagogue on Saturday and the Christians went to the church on Sunday, and that was probably the only difference. But they really united force within the community. They really lived together within the community. So when we say that there was this totally anti-Semitic sentiment going on in Hungary, do you think that was particularly true to Budapest? Or was the sentiment different in the countryside? I'm just wondering if this hatred of Jews did really happen, or perhaps just the town where my grandparents grew up or lived was just an exceptionally good and lovable and loving environment.
I am more or less familiar with the papers, with the local papers, which were published in the 20s and the 30s. It is one of my hobby to look through old papers, because the old papers, at least I believe that the old papers can give you a relevant picture of the feeling of the public. And if you see these old papers, especially which were published in 1921, anti-Semitism was a rampant phenomenon. Most of the papers had anti-Semitic tones. Most of the papers in the early 20s, and it was a general view that the Jews were not really Hungarians. They were not really Hungarians, and actually there were atrocities against Jews. We have to mention this white terror after the suppression, after the fall of the first communist dictatorship. I do not know exact numbers, but thousands were killed or assassinated as communists or as Jews. But even in the early 20s, there were atrocities committed in Budapest and early in the countryside. Jews were killed, Jews were attacked. There was an explosion in Budapest in 1921. I think in 1921, Jews were killed. So that was the general feeling. That was the general atmosphere. And telling the truth, unfortunately, the Catholic clergy was also involved in that kind of anti-Jewish attitude, and I can mention not just Ottokar Prohászka, but Béla Banga, for example, who was also a very important Catholic personality. And it was the general view that it would be the interest of the Hungarian nation to reduce the Jewish influence, and it would be the interest of Hungary to reduce the number of the Jews, because there are so many Jews. And I just mentioned the introduction of the numerus clausus, which was really a very unique situation, because that was the first so-called anti-Jewish law, which reduced the number of Jewish students at the universities to 5%, since that was the percentage of the Jews in the Hungarian population. And that anti-Jewish law was lifted only 1928. So this anti-Semitic sentiment was widespread, especially in the Hungarian intelligentsia, in the Hungarian political elite. But you are right that in the countryside, probably the relationship between Jews and Gentiles, on daily basis, in the everyday life. The relationship was okay, it was correct, there were no atrocities. So from this point, you are right.
Thank you. We have a question from one of the online attenders here. This is a question from Jim Neeson. And he has a question about the collaboration between Hungary and Romania. If there wasn't, he writes, it seems that Hungary and Romania collaborated in the expulsions. Was this an explicit and conscious collaboration or more of a de facto occurrence?
It was not a conscious collaboration, it was a de facto collaboration. There was no collaboration, but it is interesting because in our mind, we always made, especially Hungarian historians, we always made a strong difference between Hungary and Romania. So sometimes we are proud to say that Hungary was a better place than Romania. I also heard that kind of expression that Hungary was more civilized than Romania. Okay. However, if we are speaking on the Jewish policy of these countries, there were many similarities, especially speaking on the attitude towards these alien Jews. So there was no cooperation between the Hungarian and Romanian political elite, but they did about the same without any coordination. And I do not know why, but somehow they did about the same. They did about the same, probably because the background was the same. I have no clue, I do not, but they did about the same. And it was interesting that some columns of Romanian Jews, actually Jews from Bukovina and Bessarabia, were led to Kamenetsk-Podolsk. And Kamenetsk-Podolsk, Romanian Jews met with Hungarian Jews, and they were both considered as foreigners by the Romanian government and the Hungarian governments. And these both groups became the victims of the massacres which were implemented by the German police battalion. So the fate of Hungarian and Romanian Jews intertwined and Kamenetsk-Podolsk. So such a symbol, such a strong symbol.
Yeah. It's quite striking that both the Hungarian and Romanian expulsion actions, in a sense, preceded the German sort of directives to begin deporting Jews.
Germans were the perpetrators, but the Hungarian and Romanian authorities transported the Jews to the place of massacre, slaughterhouse.
Yes. Yes, question over here. Yes.
Hi, I'm Gábor Dobó, a literary historian and a Fulbright visiting scholar here in Colombia. Thank you very much for your detailed and striking presentation. I was wondering about the, at least I had the impression from your presentation that besides military campaign against people labeled to be Jews and an administrative campaign against this community, there was a cultural campaign against them as well. And the relationship between these campaigns is evident, but it seems to be a very complicated and interconnected direct, indirect relationship between these levels. So my question is that could you develop a little bit more about this sphere?
You mean between the cultural campaign?
Yeah, so how did the culture, in a broad sense, a cultural campaign, an anti-Semitic campaign caused these, the extermination of Jewish people labeled to be Jewish, or was just consequence of administrative campaign against Jews, or was just a representation of these events? So this is my question, more or less.
The cultural campaign against Jews was very intensive in the early 20s, but it's true that this campaign weakened in the late 20s and the early 30s. However, it became intensive again in the late 30s, since in the late 30s, opportunity arose to implement the so-called Great Anti-Jewish Plan, because anti-Jewish legislation was introduced. And to my best knowledge, the cultural campaign and the anti-Jewish legislation was well received by the greater part of the Hungarian society. So this Jewish campaign had a public support. And it is also interesting that more and more papers, daily papers, switched to anti-Semitic tones in the late 30s. And these anti-Semite papers were published and were circulated in great numbers and in growing numbers, because there was a demand from the part of the public for these anti-Semitic papers. So the numbers of papers and the numbers of copies intensively went up or grew in the late 30s and in the early 40s. So this is a sign that the Hungarian society, or at least an important or a wide segment of the Hungarian society was opened for anti-Semitic rhetoric, and were open for that kind of cartoons I mentioned, or there were many anti-Jewish jokes at that time. And in this atmosphere, it was easy for the Hungarian administration to implement the regulation to round up the so-called foreigners. So it was no problem for the members of the policemen or for the members of the Hungarian gendarmerie to round up the Jews in Kárpát-Ruthénia or in Budapest or in other parts of the country. There was no resistance. There was no resistance from the part of the public. There was no resistance from the part of the Jews. It was considered almost as a natural process. There was no resistance, and the soldiers took the Jews who were concentrated at the concentration camps at Körösfő, and the Jews took the Jews to the lorries, and they were transported to Galicia. There were some politicians and some personalities who really opposed, who tried to resist it and to intervene for the interest of the deported Jews. I have to mention the Margit Schrakta, who even visited Transcarpathia and who reported what happened to the deported Jews, and who reported about the brutality of the gendarmerie when they rounded up the Jews. Actually, the representatives of the United States in Budapest, Herbert C. Pell, also intervened for the interest of the deported Jews, and he wrote a letter to the Hungarian Prime Minister László Bardosi, and he asked the stop of the deportation. So there were foreign diplomats and there were Hungarians who tried to resist, who spoke out, but not the society.
If I could actually have one more question. as a language teacher, I'm always interested in language. And I was struck by some of the terms, I think it's already been mentioned, the terms that were used in 1941 to refer to the Jews, or in the 1920s and 30s. And you use the word alien quite a bit in the talk. I'm wondering what is that word in Hungarian, and what are its sort of, I guess, semantic relationships? Does it mean stranger? Does it mean foreigner? Does it mean somebody who doesn't belong? I'm thinking of my own linguistic sort of field of study. In Polish, there are multiple words for, you could talk about, a stranger or somebody, one of ours, one of theirs. There's a lot of overlap between these different categories for sort of projecting a category of otherness onto someone. So I'm just interested about the Hungarian language itself, the words that were used, the word alien in particular, whether it was something that overlapped between official and popular discourse. Was it enshrined in sort of regulations? And what are the sort of, I guess, maybe ethnic or national semantic fields that might come into play around the word alien?
It was not alien. The meaning of alien in Hungarian, idegen, and which means that you do not belong to any country.
Is he okay? Okay.
So you are separated. So
Okay.
you do not belong to anywhere. And
There's a specific reference to a community or something like that, or
so it is not a label of a community.
Okay.
It means that somebody who's alienated,
Okay.
who is alienated. But these so-called alien Jews or foreign Jews were also called that Polish Jews,
I see. Okay.
or they use the expression that Eastern Jews or Galicianer, Galician Jews, or just foreigners, or Jews without home, or stateless Jews. These expressions were made.
In say in policy and official documents, the word idegen would have been used.
Yes, they used, yes, the aliens, with Jewish race or aliens of Jewish race.
Okay.
So that these were mentioned in the various regulations. So the first regulations against alien Jews with Jewish race turned up in the early 20s. In the early 20s. So the first regulation turned up, and because even at that time there were attempts to expel the alien Jews who had no Hungarian citizens, who had no Hungarian citizenship. But the problem was that they were considered Polish citizens since they were originated from Galicia, but in the early 20s, Galicia was a part of Poland. So the Hungarian government wanted to transport these Jews to Poland, but the Polish government did not receive these Jews because, according to the Polish government, they were not Poles, they were aliens.
Yes.
So they were aliens from Hungarian point, they were aliens from Polish point, they were aliens from Austrian points. However, they were Austrian citizens before the end of the First World War. So that's a very strange. It's a typical trap situation. And there are tens of thousands Jews who used to be probably Austrian citizens, or they thought that they have Hungarian citizenship, and it turned out that they are unwanted, they are aliens, they have neither Hungarian citizenship nor Austrian nor Polish citizenship. So that was a typical trap situation. And that situation was the predecessor of this whole 1941 deportation.
Yeah, fascinating. Any further questions, comments, thoughts? Let's see, we have a comment once again from Jim Neeson, our previous questioner, who writes that the word for statelessness in the Hontalan or Hontalan cartoon is Hontalanság,
Hontalan, yeah.
which might
Hontalan
be
state-
translated as homelessness. He mentions that it could be translated as homelessness.
Not, no, I don't think so. Statelessness, because homeless people means that somebody who is wandering on the street because
I see, okay,
without home.
without, oh, okay.
So
Be a
that,
different
so we, that's a different word. So we use the homeless for people who have no home.
Okay, okay,
So it is a, so the stateless, this is
okay.
the proper word,
The Hontalanság,
Hontalan,
okay,
for that category of Jews.
okay.
For that category of Jews. Thank you for the questions and thank you for the comments.
Well, if there are no further comments, let's thank our guest, Tamás Stark, for a fascinating presentation on